Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Bill Todd, and thanks for joining us this week on Market Journal. We've got a great show in store for you today, so what do you say we jump right in? Starting off our headlines today, we'd like to take a look at a digital tool that could pay off in a big way this harvest season. Now, there are several challenges in managing harvest grain moisture. However, producers have the decision-making power to reduce the amount of moisture discounts potentially faced upon delivery. The University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Harvest Moisture Calculator is one free online tool that can aid producers in minimizing elevator discounts and leave more money in their pockets. This online tool can predict an average price received based on the operation's delivery moisture levels, buyer discount schedules, implicit discounts from drier grain, and cash prices can be adjusted according to the current conditions. Better yet, it's easy to use and interpret.
On this harvest moisture price calculator, it's a chart. So on the left side, on the y-axis, it's cash price that the farmer receives, and on the x-axis, it's moisture level. And on this chart, we have several different discount schedules from grain buyers embedded on there. Let's take corn, for example. Most grain buyers begin discounting corn at the 15% level. So at the 15% level, you receive, say the base cash price is $5. So you receive $5 for delivering corn at 15%, and that'll be on the chart. But once you move into higher moisture levels, where these grain buyers begin discounting, you're going to slowly receive less and less money. On the left side, it's one line where it's a line equivalent to the cash price you're going to receive by delivering in drier bushels. You can adjust the beginning and ending moisture level that you begin and end at. And from that, the moisture price calculator generates an average cash price you're going to receive associated with each different grain buyer that we have listed on there. From this, you're able to compare across grain buyers what cash price you're going to be receiving, and that can help you decide where to deliver. It can also give you the feel for maybe you want to start harvesting at 16% moisture. Maybe you want to start harvesting at 15.5% moisture. Whatever that level is, it will help you gauge what is best for you to minimize these moisture discounts.
In order to accommodate harvest moisture differences between crops, separate moisture calculators have been created for both corn and soybeans. Furthermore, the tools are specific to conditions faced for each crop. In order to achieve peak utilization of this online tool, it's recommended to enter the current cash price and bushel amount before identifying discount schedules similar to the locations you deliver to. If you'd like more information on UNL's Harvest Moisture Price Calculator and the economics of corn and soybean harvest moisture, you can find that and more at cap.unl.edu. We've also posted some helpful links on the Market Journal website. And moving over to markets now, and there's been a lot to keep an eye on this week. Soybean sales to China have been lower than they should be under the terms of the Phase 1 agreement. Furthermore, the global supply chain continues to endure strain. And joining me this week to discuss those topics and more is Heartland Farm Partners President, Jeff Peterson. So, Jeff, let's go ahead and just get started here with your take on the quarterly grain and stocks report. It looked like corn was looking up while soybeans were kind of on a downtrend. What were your thoughts or takeaways on that?
You know, you exactly nailed it. You never know when you have a quarterly stock number come out what to expect, but they definitely, we saw higher stocks on the corn side. We saw higher stocks also on the soybean side. You know, the 1.236 billion bushels on corn. You know, in the WASDE report out September, it was 1.187 billion, so they brought it up slightly. The beans was a bigger surprise at 256 million bushels. You know, that compared to 175 million in the September WASDE report. So, you know, we ended up bringing both those stocks up. The thing that got the most attention was the soybean number. And the reason was because the ending stocks were high enough that it did put some pressure on soybeans. And the main thing is not only was it higher than the trade guess, it was actually higher than kind of the range of estimates. So that was a big surprise to the market.
So how have soybean sales been looking with China in particular?
Yeah, that's the thing that everybody's got a close eye on. We're a little concerned with China that they haven't been in buying as much as we normally expect. Usually this time of year, we're expecting them to be big buyers. Right now, when we compare what the sales have been to China compared to a year ago at this time, they're down almost 35%. And the confusing part about this is it sure looks like their hog herd is probably just as large as it would have been pre African swine fever. So everybody's trying to wrestle and figure out, did we miss something? Are they going to pull bushels out of stocks? Are they physically going to try to source the bushels, from Brazil and just wait a little bit longer? Are they going to adhere to anything on the phase 1 trade deal? That part comes into too, because that last year we just said with the phase 1 that it was maybe spurring some purchases. So those are all some of the types of questions that are coming in right now, and unfortunately we don't have a lot of great answers. We would believe that they need to step in and buy more bushels from the U.S. We don't think they can get all the way through to when Brazil has their next crop, and purchase less overall. So we're still expecting those exports to pick up, and we're expecting the shipments to pick up. We think some of the thing that could be going on is that beans were tight. Even though we just talked about the fact that there's more stocks, the pipeline was very tight on soybeans. So they could be waiting for a few more beans to flow in, and also for that situation that the Gulf to improve, so we've got more ability to get stuff exported out too.
And that brings up the next question. Let's focus a little bit on the global supply chain. So over the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing reports of continued or worsening strain as far as transport, labor. How are these problems impacting producers locally here?
Yeah, a few of the things that we're noticing, so big thing we're hearing about is, I think, it's going to be on the crop input side. I think we're going to continue to see talk about higher fertilizer prices, not just talk of it, but also fertilizer prices, whether you're talking about anhydrous ammonia, whether you're talking about, liquid fertilizer. We're also hearing concerns about, on the chemical side, the herbicides. We're also hearing that because of some supply shortages, whether for whatever reason, that could have some impact on what the availability of supply there. So in the end, what it really looks like is that, we're going to be talking about higher costs of production for guys as we start talking about that 2022 crop year. And
you just segued straight into the next question here. We're really looking at an all-time high here in 2022 for corn production. What are input costs looking like now? What are we projecting? And do you have any advice on that front for producers?
Yeah, I really do. And it's a great thing to start talking about, because right now, most of the seed costs are out and they're going to be up slightly. Fertilizer costs are going to be up probably the highest along with the chemical side. So if you can go ahead and get those prices locked in, unfortunate part, in many cases, you may not be able to get the prices locked in, or they may have already moved up. But what it's going to cause some individuals to do is it's going to cause them to kind of think about, well, wait a minute, where and which crop should my acres get put into? So should we and could we have some acres from corn get switched over to soybeans because they don't want to pay as much, on the fertilizer side? Chemicals probably would be comparable between the two. But then as we move into some other areas, it brings up the whole discussion about acres and ultimately, are there going to be other crops? Are some of the acres going to go into cotton? Are some going to go into spring wheat or winter wheat or oats or different other crops? So I think part of what we'll end up seeing is a battle for acres. And we're starting to see that kind of develop, and how we're seeing that as we look at prices is that, like corn, for instance, on the December 22 contract, it's been really firm and actually been kind of increasing and faring better than what we've had for, these old crop bushels, the harvest or the bushels that they're harvesting now. So we're starting to see kind of that battle line start drawing up.
Excellent. So before we let you go today, do you have any, management or risk management or marketing advice that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, I really do. This time of year, a few things that we really got to think about. Basis-wise, we're continuing to think that the basis is going to continue to get stronger. I think we're getting through a lot of our areas here where bean harvest is well along its way. It's many areas have went over that 50% level. Mm-hmm. So I would say we're going to see some improvement on basis levels yet. So if you've got some post-harvest bushels yet, on the soybean side that you haven't sold, we think the basis is going to improve more. We also think on the corn side we'll see a stronger corn basis also. So keep your basis open there for harvest, and also post-harvest we think we'll see some stronger numbers yet. For sure the post-harvest side is where the stronger numbers will be by far. As you get into the stuff for harvest time delivery, there, if you've got some good bids, go ahead and don't hesitate to lock up your basis on that. And then we're looking for post-harvest. We think we'll see some better prices on corn for sure. Beans we got to watch closely. And so if you're hesitant on the bean side of getting some sales made, maybe to make a sale and buy a call to give yourself some protection there, that's okay too. But overall we're optimistic prices going forward.
Next week, we'll be joined by DTN lead analyst Todd Hultman. If you've got a question you'd like for me to ask him, please feel free to shoot me an email or get in touch on social media, and I'll be sure to pass that question along. Next up, with the drought conditions faced by many producers this year, the question may arise of how to handle annual forages standing in the field that may not have grown as much as they would have under preferable conditions. As these drought-stressed forages can contain higher amounts of nitrate that have the potential to lead to toxic impacts on cattle, we turn to Nebraska Extension Beef Systems Specialist Mary Dranowski to get a few suggestions on what to do with high nitrate forage. Cattle producers who have faced high levels of drought throughout the summer may be dealing with forage that contains higher amounts of nitrate than usual. Unfortunately, the only way to tell if your forage is high in nitrate is to have it tested. And when going through the process of sampling and testing, there are a few key points to keep in mind.
Now, the question becomes, how do I get a sample? And that depends a bit on the situation and what you're trying to accomplish. For instance, if you are trying to decide how you're going to harvest it, and so it's standing in the field, and that might change the decision you're going to make, then we're going to do something a little bit different because we're going to sample in the field. Couple things to think about even with sampling in the field is location matters, because there will be hot spots theoretically. Places that are sandier or droughtier probably will have higher nitrates, as well as shaded areas will have higher nitrates. Anything that interferes with the plant's ability basically to grow can result in higher nitrates. So dryland corners, for instance, will be much higher in nitrates. So you have to decide then how you're going to sample. Do I want to know the absolute worst case scenario, or do I want to sample kind of a representation of what I think the field is? One of the things to consider there is that, especially if it's corners or if there's large areas that are more droughty than others, they tend to be less mature plants, and that means cattle, if you allow them to graze, will probably go to them first. So sampling them separately and knowing what the maximal risk is kind of makes sense, because otherwise you might lull yourself into thinking things are a little bit easier than they are.
If you have the means to do so, one of your best options would be to ensile your forage. This can greatly decrease the amount of nitrate in your forage. However, if this is the route you choose, moisture levels are going to be critical to your success.
If everything goes well, you end up with a product that has 50% less nitrate than it did. And then you have silage, which means it's fairly easy to be able to feed with other ingredients, so you can dilute it more if you need to, and you can provide grain, for instance, if you need to. So one of the things that you've got to remember is that for that 50% reduction to happen, you have to have good fermentation. So moisture is probably the number one thing that I see as a challenge sometimes, especially for people who are making silage out of something they're not normally making silage out of. They tend to either harvest it when it's too wet or too dry. Too wet tends to be the most normal, and we've actually seen in some situations where they harvest it, it's fairly wet, like 20% dry matter, 25% dry matter, actually seeing no benefit on nitrates. So you got to make sure you get the moisture right so you get the good fermentation that you need. The clostridial fermentation with really wet material does not seem to reduce nitrates the same way as the fermentation that we look for when we're getting the lactic acid and the acetic acid. So bottom line, make sure you're targeting that moisture content of 60 to 65%.
If you aren't going to graze and you don't happen to be set up for silage, another option is harvesting forages for hay. However, as dry material has the ability to release nitrate quickly, there are some challenges involved with this method.
If you provide hay to the cattle, they can consume dry matter very quickly. Each bite has a lot of dry matter in it, so that goes against us. And then oftentimes, because of the way hay is made, you'll have hot spots, right? So you might have a bale that has really high levels because it was in one part of the field where you had one of those conditions that increased nitrates. Or even just a small hot spot that was an area that had high nitrates for some reason. And unfortunately, if you provide a bale-free choice to cattle, they tend to sit at the same spot and eat. That may mean that one cow happens to get a hot spot. So what we suggest is actually, in this case, to set the threshold even lower if I'm going to feed a hay bale-free choice. with the idea that if I'm going to sample, the way I'm going to sample, right, is to get a core sample. It's going to go through a lot of layers and supposed to be representative of the whole, which means I may or may not pick up, right, those hot spots. And so we set the threshold lower with the idea that we know some might be higher. But if you were to, say, grind it and include it into a ration, now we can handle a lot higher concentrations because dilution is the solution, right? So if you can grind it and mix it with other feedstuffs, we can use very high nitrate hays. We just got to get the total diet nitrate concentrations down. And we have energy in the diet. Energy, roomly available energy is key here. So grain is your friend. You know, it only takes 1 to 2 pounds per cow to have a lot of impact if you're feeding something that is lower quality. Hay tends to be lower quality just because we tend to wait to harvest it until we have a lot of yield, which means it's a little bit more mature. And so that kind of works against us as well.
Big thanks to Mary for taking the time to talk with us this week. We're going to have her back over the next couple of weeks to discuss the crop residue exchange program, as well as some things to consider when making winter cattle care agreements. In the meantime, if you require any assistance with developing a management plan for forage containing high levels of nitrate, you're encouraged as always to reach out to your local extension educator. And our next story comes to us from Sumner, Nebraska. Mackenzie Beatty went on an entrepreneurial retreat and came home with a great idea: helping operate a diversified pork operation with her parents. Mackenzie shared the idea with her sister Madison about starting to sell pork directly to consumers, and they already had the perfect name for their business: Sassy Sisters Swine. During COVID, market interruptions meant that consumers were looking for farmers to purchase directly from, so the Sassy Sisters were filling a direct need. You can learn all about their direct pork marketing venture in the October issue of Nebraska Farmer. And it's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we had a great week of weather for everyone working out in the fields. What can we expect as we move into the next week?
Well, Bill, we had a very good week in terms of harvest activity, weather, nothing in the way of any precipitation, just a slight amount of cloud cover and a few sprinkles in the panhandle, particularly Wednesday night into Thursday, as we've seen a little piece of energy moving out of the trough that is developing across the western United States. As of this past Sunday, according to NASS, 21% of the corn and 21% of the sorghum across the state had been harvested, and 34% of the soybeans. With the weather we had this week, I expect that the soybean number is going to be pushing up in the upper 50s to the upper 60s, depending on how much of the activity was delayed due to very dry conditions during the middle of the day. But overall, couldn't argue with the weather we've had. Now, as we go into next week, there has been signs for the last 10 days of a very active pattern, and it looks like the models are finally coming to a consensus that we're going to see a fairly strong storm system move across the central and northern plains, and the potential is there for some significant moisture in terms of heavy rainfall and thunderstorm activity. So it's just a matter of where this system moves out and who really gets smacked with a lot of this heavy precipitation. So we go to the upper air models. First thing we'll draw your attention to is the cold front that is going to be expected to move through the state today is going to be the result of the northern stream energy moving toward the Great Lakes, and the southern stream energy is going to basically bypass most of the southern Nebraska. So the low pressure sits up in eastern North Dakota. As we sit here this morning, thunderstorm activity widespread across North Dakota. They really need it. This is going to help them alleviate some of the drought concerns. The second piece of energy we go into tomorrow is the southern stream. That's going to move a low pressure system at the surface up toward the Great Lakes. Right now, the best area for precipitation will be across southeastern Nebraska, and even then I don't know as if we will see it make it up this far. More of this precipitation is likely to rain to our south, especially as the system ejects out with the trough really digging to the west on Monday. So here you see that low pressure system up in northeastern portions of Missouri. That's where we're actually expecting this low to be. And then the residual thunderstorm activity associated with it will move northeast and weakening over time as this next system comes out Tuesday morning and starts to really get wound up. So we're going to see a big fetch of moisture. Surface low develops in northwestern Kansas. Gulf is wide open for the transport of moisture northward. We'll see the first of the moisture starting to develop over the Intermountain region, and then we'll start to see that spread as this system moves rapidly toward the north and the northeast. That's going to bring that Gulf moisture up and cover a broad area of the central and northern plains with some significant moisture. In the terms of thunderstorm activity and potentially severe, might even be a few cold snowflakes on the back side of it. By the time we get to Thursday, you can see the system kind of flattens out, broadens out in this trough. So that means we're going to stay on the cool side. Temperatures are going to remain in the 50s to the 60s during that Wednesday-Thursday time period as that precipitation shield moves off to the northeast. And then we see a secondary area of precipitation to our south by Friday. The broad general trough is in place. We'll start to move toward the Great Lakes, and we'll start to see a warming trend to our west as that high pressure system tries to build into our region. Looking further out into the future, we're looking at above normal temperatures with below normal to the west. And the reason I mention this, we've got another large trough coming in that's likely to bring that cooler conditions, and in terms of precipitation, below normal. But I will mention this, the 19th and the 20th, the GFS model is indicating a very sharp cold air infiltration into our region, bringing an end to the growing season. Wait to see if that performs, and if it does, we may actually see some snow as that front moves through the region.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, agricultural technology has grown by leaps and bounds over the last couple of decades. However, just because progress is made doesn't mean we stop looking for new ways to innovate. UNL Associate Professor of Advanced Machinery Systems, Santosh Pitla, was kind enough to give us a behind-the-scenes look at how he and his students are creating an autonomous tractor that implements ground robotics. This technology could eventually allow producers to better meet the growing global demand for food.
My research is in the area of agricultural robotics and machine systems automation. So our goal is to build the next generation of machine systems that are helpful to produce food, fiber, and fuel in the most efficient way possible. With that in mind, we are developing smart robotic platforms that can go into the field and analyze the cropping conditions and then apply fertilizers, chemicals in the most efficient way possible. So if we can save on the crop inputs, when you are very precise in how much crop inputs you're applying, so that will increase the profitability of an operation, which means you're applying less, but you're getting more yields because you're saving on crop inputs. And we have to be doing all this with keeping environment in mind, right? So we got to be we got to have the least negative impact on the environment, and being precise with the robots can definitely help with that. All right, so what we have here is a 60 horsepower robotic platform that is field usable. And this robotic platform, our goal is to make it very practical so that farmers and producers can actually use it in their fields. And since this is 60 horsepower, we can use it for multiple purposes. So you could do sensing of the crop to know what is the status of the crop in the field. And you can also do a 2-row unit planting operation. And then we can also do spraying operations. So this is a really modular, multi-purpose platform. And some of the unique features of this robot is that this has a 4-wheel steering. So not just 4-wheel drive, we have hydraulic motors driving all the 4 wheels, but we also have 4-wheel steering so that you can do different steering modes, like an Ackerman steering, which is very typical, like a car that has Ackerman steering. But you can also do crab steering and articulated steering. So you have very unique steering opportunities with the goal of improving the field efficiency. So with the goal of getting more useful time in the field. So this since this is 60 horsepower, so we are using internal combustion engine and a hydrostatic transmission that involves hydraulic pumps and hydraulic motors. This has a communication system called CAN bus system that is industry standard that makes it very modular. So you can add and remove multiple computer modules on this robot so that we can use it for various operations. And on the front, since this is a driverless machine, there is no operator, so we can use a remote in manual mode, but we can also put our computer and give it a GPS path. So using a GPS, it is going to follow those waypoints or path that we provided and it is going to work in automatic mode. So we call this supervised autonomy because we still need to take this robot from one field to another field. So that's why we call it supervised autonomy. And what you're seeing here is a obstacle sensing module. So since there is no operator on this, so it has to know when there is an obstacle in front of it, it needs to react and stop. So this robot can, if there's an obstacle in front of it, it will stop at a safe distance. So it doesn't damage itself and also doesn't damage the object that is seeing in front of it. So, you know, agriculture today is very different from what it was many years ago. So when we are training students in the agriculture engineering and mechanized systems management area, we are talking about a systems approach, right? It's not just designing a machine, but it's also about the mechatronic system, the software systems, and how all these technology systems are interacting with, you know, the crops, the soil, the land system, and the water bodies. So it's a systems approach that that we are trying to engage our students in. So it's always very exciting to see freshman students, especially where they're very interested in learning, you know, whatever learned in their class, the theory, how does it translate to practice, you know? So those are some of the things that I'm very passionate about, is whatever they are learning in the classroom, how can we relate to what's happening in the real world? And these type of lab activities and exercises really allow me to bridge that gap between theory and practice.
While Santosh tells us it will be several years down the road before we see these fully autonomous tractors, we may see smaller versions of machines like this introduced to the general public in increments down the road. If you'd like to learn more about the work Dr. Pitla and his team are focusing on, we've included a link on the Market Journal website. And that's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. We'll hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Bill Dodd. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.